Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained is just one hell of a movie, regardless of where you'd personally rank it in the filmmaker's outstanding filmography. Released back in 2012, the blood-soaked revisionist western won 2 Oscars and remains the director's highest-grossing film to date. Yet despite how many times you might have already seen it, it's a film absolutely packed to the gills, with sneaky references and subtle nuances you can easily miss if you're not paying total attention. And even then, many of them are blink and you'll miss it. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 20 things you somehow missed in Django Unchained. Number 20, James Remar plays Schultz's first kill and the person who kills him. You may well have noticed that veteran character actor James Remar plays 2 supporting roles in the film. But did you appreciate their fateful significance to Dr. King Schultz? Near the start of the movie, Remar first appears as Ace Speck, Django's owner, who soon enough ends up shot in the head and killed by Schultz. He then reappears later as Butch Pooch, one of Calvin Candy's bodyguards, who ends up shooting Schultz dead immediately after Schultz kills Candy. So, to summarize, Remar ends up playing both Schultz's first kill in the movie and the man who ends up killing him. As for why Tarantino cast the same actor in both roles, well, you'd have to ask him. Number 19, Nash and Coons. When we briefly see the wanted poster for the Smitty Bacall gang, the names of 2 of the gang's members should stand out to fans of Tarantino's filmography: Gerald Nash and Crazy Craig Coons. Given Tarantino's fondness for not so subtly implying a shared universe between his movies, we can safely infer that Nash is likely related to Reservoir Dogs' ill-fated kidnapped policeman Marvin Nash. And as for Coons, well, that one's a little bit easier to remember. It's Vietnam War veteran Captain Coons from Pulp Fiction, played so memorably in a small role by Christopher Walken. While the familial links themselves are vague at best, given that Tarantino imbues all of his movies with an exacting amount of detail, there is no way that these name drops were mere coincidence. Number 18, why there are only 5 bullets in Django's revolver. When Django kills the Brittle brothers, he wipes out Roger Lil Raj Brittle by shooting him dead with his own revolver. Yet you might have noticed that Django only fires 5 bullets, despite the gun being able to hold 6. I mean, being a 6-shooter and all. Well, the reason for this? Single-action revolvers of the era didn't have a transfer bar, meaning that the gun's hammer would be resting on one of the chambers, increasing the risk of an accidental discharge if, say, the gun was dropped or mishandled. By leaving the chamber the hammer rests on empty, that risk was mitigated, even if it meant having one less bullet chambered for an engagement. So there you have it. Much as Tarantino is hardly a stickler for historical authenticity, he at least got this detail dead on. Number 17, Tom Savini's cameo. Legendary Hollywood makeup artist Tom Savini, best known for his gory contributions to George A. Romero's classic zombie films, has a brief cameo in the film as one of Candy's slave trackers, whose guard dogs of course brutally maul slave D'Artagnan to death. Savini's character can also be briefly seen later in the movie when Django goes back to save Broomhilda. Savini's involvement was more than mere fan service though. He goes way back with Tarantino, having appeared alongside him in the cult fave vampire film From Dusk Till Dawn, which was also written by Tarantino and directed by their mutual pal Robert Rodriguez. Number 16, Schultz whistles the original Django theme. At the start of the scene where members of the proto-KKK prepare for their raid against Django and Schultz, we briefly see Schultz sticking a hunk of dynamite inside the novelty tooth on top of his wagon cart. While doing so, he whistles a tune. And though this might seem totally inconsequential, it's actually composer Luis Bacalov's theme tune from the original 1966 spaghetti western Django. This wasn't the first time that Tarantino used a whistle to nod to an iconic piece of film music. In Kill Bill Volume 1, he had Elle Driver whistle the title track from Bernard Herrmann's score for Twisted Nerve as she tries in vain to kill the bride. Number 15, Django's first kill and Schultz's last kill mirror each other. In another curious instance of kills throughout the movie mirroring each other, there's an intriguing parallel between Django's first kill and Schultz's last kill. Django's first kill is Big John Brittle, while Schultz's last kill is Calvin Candy. In both instances, the same gun is used, with the victim being surprised by its concealed nature before being shot in the heart, all while blood spills onto a white object on their chest, a piece of paper and a flower, respectively, and they then take a few seconds to fall down dead. In the immortal words of George Lucas, it's like poetry, it rhymes. Number 14, a clownsman falls off their horse. Okay, so here's a really funny one, though considering the dark nature of the scene, you couldn't be blamed at all for missing it. When the Klansmen ride their horses over the hill towards Django and Schultz, look closely at the middle of the screen and you might just notice a rider falling off their horse and getting damn near trampled to death by another. Now, to be clear, you might need to raise the brightness levels on your TV to spot this one, considering the low-key lighting involved. But it absolutely does happen. It doesn't seem to be a planned part of the scene, but then again, it totally works given that the Klansmen are riding with crudely made eyesight-limiting hoods, so. Number 13, it's about a dentist fighting candy. Prepare to have your mind blown, and also hate yourself for not realizing this earlier. Django Unchained is about Dr. King Schultz, a dentist turned bounty hunter, facing off against Calvin Candy, a savage slave owner with bad teeth. So just to be clear, it's a movie about a dentist battling candy. Do you get it? Again, this is one of those glaringly obvious things that hides itself so perfectly in plain sight. Simple wordplay we fail to fully appreciate because we're so wrapped up in the brilliantly written story and characters. Or that's what we're gonna tell ourselves anyway. But if you did manage to catch that one yourself, well done, I applaud you. Number 12, Tarantino's second cameo. For better or worse, everyone remembers Tarantino's late film cameo as a member of the LeQuint Dickey Mining Company. Atrocious Australian accent and all. But he also makes another appearance earlier in the movie in decidedly less conspicuous fashion. When the proto-KKK members are arguing over their poorly made hoods, one of the Klansmen asks a hood-wearing colleague, Robert, how well he can see out of the hood. And this character, whose face is never seen, is voiced by none other than Tarantino himself. Once you know it's him, it's really an easy spot, yet the scene is so awash in various voices of masked individuals that it's incredibly easy to miss otherwise. Number 11, Candy's dinner pretensions. There are several references made to the Candy family's superficially well-to-do nature, that beyond all their riches, they're putting up a pretentious facade to give the impression that they belong in high society. Case in point, at the start of dinner, we see Schultz pour salt on his steak, but refuse an offer of gravy, all while Calvin's sister Lara accepts the gravy. And so in a vapid attempt to appear classy rather than stereotypically southern, when Broomhilda brings the jug of gravy over to his steak, Calvin taps it with his knife, shooing her away and refusing the gravy. Couple this with the fact that Candy, an alleged Francophile, doesn't know the meaning of the word panache, and his highfalutin facade quickly wears very, very thin. Number 10, Django learns from Schultz's gunplay at the end. And one more gunplay-related parallel now. At the start of the movie, when Schultz frees Django, note the extremely slick move where Schultz drops his lantern and immediately pulls out a pistol, allowing him to catch Ace Woody by surprise and blow him the hell away. Django evidently paid very close attention to this sleight of hand, as he does the very same thing right at the end of the movie. As the Candy clan returns to the mansion following Calvin's funeral, they find Django lying in wait, holding a candle in hand. A mere moment later, he drops the candle to the floor and immediately pulls out a gun, similarly allowing him to get the drop on his numerous adversaries. Number 9, the original Django has a cameo. There's no greater tribute to the original Django film than the fact that its star, Franco Nero, has a cameo appearance. Nero plays the small part of an Italian slave owner who goes to the bar following the loss of a Mandingo fight and briefly crosses paths with Jamie Foxx's Django. Tellingly, when Django tells him that the D in his name is silent, he retorts with, "I know." All the same, unless you're a huge fan of spaghetti westerns or familiar with Nero's career, it's incredibly easy to take this cameo at face value and not appreciate what Tarantino's actually nodding to. Fun fact, Nero initially suggested to Tarantino that he should play a mysterious horseman appearing to Django in visions throughout the film, who at the end would be revealed as Django's father, an idea which the filmmaker probably quite sensibly vetoed. Number 8. The red bandana woman is played by Zoe Bell. Late in the film, when Django guns down a room full of trackers, we briefly see that one of them is a woman who wears a red bandana over her face, with Tarantino even lingering on her for a few telling moments. Given that the lower half of her face isn't visible, you'd be forgiven for failing to spot that the tiny role was actually played by Tarantino's regular collaborator Zoe Bell, who has worked as both a stunt double and an actress across the latter half of his filmography. As it turns out, the character was originally intended to have a much larger part in the film, with a backstory and a fight scene, but it was cut due to time constraints during shooting. Bell also revealed that her character wore a bandana to conceal the fact that she's missing her entire jaw, as would have been revealed had Tarantino been given time to shoot the full version of the scene. Number 7. The meaning behind Mr. Candy. As Schultz first heads to meet Candy, he's informed that as a Francophile, Candy prefers to be referred to as Monsieur Candy rather than Mr. Candy. And for all but one of their interactions, Schultz does indeed address Candy per his preferences. This single exception comes in their final scene together, when after the sale of Broomhilda has been completed, Schultz says, "Mr. Candy, normally I would say Auf Wiedersehen. But since what Auf Wiedersehen actually means is till I see you again, and since I never wish to see you again, to you, sir, I say goodbye." At this point, any remaining facade of placating Candy has been totally dropped, extending even to how he addresses him. Number 6. The poker game uses slaves' severed ears as chips. Okay, now this one's really gross and you might wish that you never knew it. Near the end of the movie, moments before Django kills the trackers who are playing poker, look incredibly closely at the table they're playing on. And you might just notice that they're not playing with typical chips, but rather some strange fleshy objects. As it turns out, they're actually betting with ears. And Tarantino's script goes further to clarify that they're the ears of black slaves. And if that's somehow not horrifying enough, Tarantino adds that those who rewatch the film might even notice that some of the Candyland slaves are missing ears. Good God. Number 5. Django learns from being blinded by blood. It's always satisfying from a film continuity perspective to see characters learn from prior mistakes, even if only in incredibly subtle fashion. And that's absolutely true of Django and his close-range shooting technique. After Schultz's death, Django pulls his gun and shoots Butch Pooch dead, at which point the massive squib of blood squirts in his eyes, blinding him enough that he misses his next shot at another of Candy's goons. Django clearly takes note of his mistake though, as later when he convinces the slaver escorts to free him and hand him a gun, he closes his eyes before opening fire on the two men in front of him, ensuring the blood splatter doesn't blind him. This then allows him to make a bullseye shot at the third escort's dynamite pouch, exploding him instantly. Now that is character development. Number 4. Amber and Russ Tamblin's cameos. Here's a cute duo of cameos that were missed by all but the most eagle-eyed of viewers. Early in the film, as Django and Schultz enter the town of Daughtry, they're eyeballed by the locals, including a young woman looking from a window up high and an older gentleman on the ground. These background artists are in fact actress Amber Tamblyn and her father Russ, the latter having famously starred in the classic 1965 western Son of a Gunfighter. As for how the pair made it into the movie, well, according to Amber herself, Tarantino is a good friend and invited her to do a cameo, at which point she suggested it would be great if she and her father played a father-daughter pair in the movie. And so, in a nod to her father's western past, the duo are credited as son of a gunfighter and daughter of a son of a gunfighter, respectively. Number 3. Django kneecaps Stephen for faking his limp. At the very end of the movie, rather than directly kill Calvin's head house slave Stephen, Django shoots him in the kneecaps and leaves him helpless to escape as he blows the mansion up. It's a fitting end for Stephen, given that moments earlier, he threw his cane aside, implying that he had been faking, or in the very least wildly exaggerating, the extent of his limp. For Django to seriously injure a man who had been falsifying his condition, moments before leaving him to die no less, was the ultimate insult for the last villain standing, or as the case ultimately was, not standing. Number 2. Django steals Candy's clothes at the end. Now, this one should be incredibly obvious, and yet it's bafflingly easy to miss amid the chaos of that incredible final scene. When Django returns to the Candy mansion to mop up the rest of his family and followers, he's actually wearing the very same burgundy suit that Candy was wearing the first time he met Django, Django having presumably raided his closet to put it on. To hammer the point home, Django even says to Stephen, "How do you like my new duds?" You know, before now, I didn't know that burgundy was my color. And yet, it's almost embarrassingly easy to miss this fact, as silly as it might seem in retrospect. Right down to the cigarette extender, he's delivering the final blow to Candy by destroying his home while wearing his own goods. Number 1. There's a post-credit scene. And finally, you probably don't associate Tarantino much with post-credits scenes, given that the guy's movies largely speak for themselves without any last-minute sequel baiting or teases of future attractions. But Django Unchained does in fact feature an incredibly brief post-credits stinger, returning to the scene where Django killed the slavers working for the LaQuint Dickey Mining Company. Django's fellow Mandingo fighters are simply shown looking on at the carnage as one of them asks of Django, "Who was that?" Trust Tarantino of all filmmakers to reward those who stuck around to the end with a totally perfunctory and yet absolutely hilarious final morsel.